Unfiltered inquiry, snow washing. This is the true story of how housing became unaffordable in Canada, a narrative rooted in systemic corruption, financial crimes, and policy failures that transformed a once accessible dream into an impossible reality for many. In the heart of British Columbia, a province celebrated for its stunning landscapes and vibrant cities, a darker narrative unfolded, one of pervasive money laundering that infiltrated various sectors, from real estate to financial institutions. This is the story of how illicit funds flowed freely, the challenges faced in combating this shadow economy, and the individuals who risked everything to expose the truth. Ross Alderson, the former director of the British Columbia Lottery Corporation's BCLC Anti-Money Laundering Office, became a pivotal figure in unveiling the depth of corruption within the province's casinos. Born in Australia, Alderson had a background in law enforcement and financial crime investigation, which he brought to his role at BCLC. Colleagues described him as deeply principled and unafraid to challenge authority when necessary. Motivated by a commitment to integrity and a belief in public accountability, Alderson's journey into whistleblowing was driven by frustration at systemic inaction and a personal conviction to expose the truth. Appointed in 2008, Alderson was responsible for identifying and mitigating suspicious financial activities. However, he soon encountered systemic indifference and bureaucratic obstacles that hindered effective action. Alderson observed a recurring pattern: individuals arriving at casinos with large sums of cash, often in small denominations, which they would exchange for chips. After minimal gambling, they would cash out, effectively laundering the money. Despite raising these concerns internally, his warnings were met with resistance. Frustrated by the lack of action, Alderson took the courageous step of leaking information to the media, believing that public exposure was necessary to prompt change. His revelations were instrumental in the establishment of the Cullen Commission in 2019, a public inquiry tasked with investigating money laundering in British Columbia. The commission uncovered that, by 2010, then minister responsible for gaming, Rich Coleman, was aware of concerns from the Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch, GPEB, and law enforcement about casinos being used to launder proceeds of crime. Despite this knowledge, adequate measures were not implemented to address the issue. The Commission's findings also highlighted the Vancouver model, a sophisticated method where drug money was funneled through underground banks, law firms, and casinos, ultimately being used to purchase real estate. This process not only distorted the housing market but also allowed organized crime to integrate illicit funds into the legitimate economy. For instance, individuals involved in organized crime would use underground banking systems to transfer funds internationally, bypassing traditional financial oversight mechanisms. These funds would then be funneled into real estate purchases, creating a cycle where illegal profits distorted legitimate markets. The impact of this model was felt deeply by the average citizen. The housing market in British Columbia became one of the most unaffordable in North America, displacing families and creating economic inequalities that persist to this day. Rising real estate prices, fueled by these illicit activities, forced many middle and lower income families out of urban areas, reshaping communities and exacerbating social tensions. Further compounding these issues, systemic loopholes and corruption have undermined affordable housing efforts across Canada. A forensic audit of BC Housing revealed significant mismanagement within the provincial agency responsible for affordable housing. The audit uncovered a conflict of interest involving the former CEO and his spouse, who led Atira Women's Resource Society, a major housing provider. This relationship resulted in Atira receiving preferential treatment and disproportionate funding increases, from $17 million in 2016 to $74.1 million in 2022, without proper oversight, increasing the risk to public funds. In another case, Find Properties, a prominent Vancouver developer, faced allegations of misappropriating millions, including $7.5 million in goods and services tax, GST, funds owed to the Canada Revenue Agency. Legal actions led to the receivership of several of their condo projects, highlighting severe financial mismanagement within the development sector. In Montreal, developers exploited systemic loopholes by opting to pay fines rather than fulfilling obligations to construct affordable housing units. Over 5 years, penalties amounting to $24.5 million were collected, yet not a single affordable housing unit was built. This practice not only undermined municipal efforts to increase housing stock but also failed to address the pressing needs of low-income residents. These examples illustrate how financial mismanagement and regulatory gaps have directly contributed to Canada's housing affordability crisis, exacerbating homelessness and deepening public mistrust in housing initiatives. Alderson's decision to leak information came at a personal cost. Facing professional repercussions and concerned for his safety, he relocated to Australia. Testifying remotely before the Cullen Commission, he expressed that his actions were driven by a sense of duty to the public, stating, "Did I leak information to the media? Yes, I did. We wouldn't be here today if I didn't." The Cullen Commission's final report, delivered in June 2022, concluded that systemic regulatory failures had allowed money laundering to flourish in British Columbia. Among its key recommendations were the creation of a dedicated provincial anti-money laundering task force, the establishment of stricter real estate oversight to combat laundering through property markets, and enhanced transparency for financial transactions, including mandatory reporting requirements for suspicious activities. While some initial steps, such as increased funding for regulatory bodies and new legislation targeting real estate laundering, have been implemented, critics argue that these measures fall short of the sweeping reforms needed to address the problem comprehensively. Yet the report also revealed deeper systemic issues within the regulatory bodies tasked with oversight. The Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch, GPEB, and the BCLC were found to have long-standing knowledge of the problem but lacked the political will or resources to address it effectively. Critics argue that conflicts of interest, institutional complacency, and a culture prioritizing revenue over regulation created an environment where money laundering could thrive unchecked. British Columbia's connection to international money laundering networks added another layer of complexity. The Vancouver model became infamous globally for its efficiency and reach, involving players from across Asia, Europe, and North America. A notable example involved a network of underground banks in Richmond, British Columbia, which facilitated the laundering of drug money through high-stakes gambling at casinos. These funds were then reinvested into real estate and luxury goods, with transactions often shielded by shell companies and cash-based exchanges. This scheme highlighted the intersection of organized crime and systemic regulatory failures, making British Columbia a focal point for international scrutiny. Drug cartels, corrupt officials, and underground banking systems collaborated seamlessly, making British Columbia a hub in a much larger, transnational scheme. As technology evolves, so too do the methods of laundering money. Cryptocurrencies, anonymous shell companies, and digital payment platforms have introduced new avenues for criminals to exploit. Regulatory frameworks have struggled to keep pace with these advancements, further complicating enforcement efforts. Experts warn that without substantial investment in technological and human resources, Canada risks falling further behind in combating these sophisticated schemes. Efforts like those of the Ontario Securities Commission, OSC, and FINTRAC to regulate digital asset platforms and impose anti-money laundering rules on cryptocurrency exchanges have been steps forward, but gaps remain in addressing decentralized and anonymous transactions. The public reaction to the revelations of the Cullen Commission was both outraged and demanding of accountability. The political fallout included calls for resignations, debates over reforming the institutions involved, and public pressure to ensure such failures are never repeated. Yet, despite the outrage, critics note a lack of substantial progress in implementing the Commission's recommendations, raising questions about the depth of political will to tackle these issues head-on. Ross Alderson's Unfiltered inquiry into the murky world of money laundering not only exposed deep-seated issues within British Columbia's institutions but also sparked a broader conversation on the importance of transparency, accountability, and the protection of those who dared to speak out. Beyond British Columbia, Canada has witnessed other high-profile instances of financial crimes that underscore the systemic nature of the problem. The SNC-Lavalin scandal, involving one of Canada's largest engineering firms, exposed allegations of bribery and corruption tied to contracts in Libya. Executives were accused of paying millions in bribes to secure lucrative deals, a scandal that revealed significant gaps in Canada's oversight of corporate conduct and anti-corruption enforcement. The Mount Real scandal in Montreal was a Ponzi-like scheme that defrauded investors of nearly $130 million, promising high returns on non-existent investments. This case underscored the risks posed by unchecked financial advisors and inadequate regulatory scrutiny. The Panama Papers leak linked Canadians to offshore tax havens used to conceal wealth and evade taxes. One notable case involved mining magnate Frank Giustra, whose connections to offshore accounts raised questions about the use of shell companies to shield assets. Justra denied any wrongdoing, but the revelations underscored how wealthy individuals could exploit global financial systems to minimize tax liabilities while avoiding scrutiny. Notable individuals and entities were implicated, showcasing how international loopholes are exploited to launder money and highlighting the need for stricter global cooperation. Another prominent case, the Norborg scandal, saw Norborg Asset Management's founder Vincent Lacroix defraud investors of over $100 million. The incident revealed glaring weaknesses in Quebec's financial regulatory framework and the challenges in detecting and preventing large-scale fraud. The Quadriga CX cryptocurrency debacle added a modern twist to Canadian financial scandals. In response to growing concerns over cryptocurrency-related fraud, Canadian regulatory bodies, such as the Ontario Securities Commission, OSC, have increased oversight of digital asset platforms. The OSC's investigation into Quadriga CX revealed significant governance lapses, prompting calls for stricter regulations. Canada's Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre, FINTRAC, has also expanded its mandate to include cryptocurrency exchanges under anti-money laundering rules, though experts argue more comprehensive measures are needed to keep pace with technological advancements. The mysterious death of the CEO, Gerald Cotton, led to the disappearance of $215 million in customer funds. This highlighted the lack of regulation in the cryptocurrency space and the dangers posed by unregulated digital asset management. Additionally, Canada's lenient corporate transparency laws have fostered a phenomenon known as snowwashing, where shell companies and trusts are used to launder money under the guise of legitimacy. This has contributed to money laundering not just in British Columbia but across the country, distorting markets and fueling inequality. Money laundering in Canada is not just a financial crime, it is a systemic issue that erodes public trust, distorts the economy, and compromises the integrity of institutions. Despite inquiries, reforms, and whistleblowers shining a spotlight on these activities, the shadow economy persists, often facilitated by weak regulations, institutional complacency, and political inertia. At its core, the fight against money laundering is a battle for accountability. When corruption is allowed to seep into government, it creates a dangerous precedent that profits can outweigh principles and that public institutions can be weaponized to protect illicit interests. The Cullen Commission revealed the depth of these systemic failures, but meaningful action requires more than recommendations. It demands political will, cultural change, and robust mechanisms to hold those in power accountable. As technology evolves, so do the methods of laundering money, with cryptocurrencies and anonymous shell companies adding new layers of complexity. Meanwhile, political interests and powerful lobbies often prioritize economic growth over ethical governance, perpetuating a culture of permissiveness. Canada must confront these realities head-on. This means not only strengthening laws and enforcement but also investing in investigative journalism and fostering a culture of zero tolerance for corruption at every level of government. The question is no longer whether money laundering and corruption exist in Canada. It is whether the country is prepared to summon the courage and integrity to eradicate it. The cost of inaction is not just economic, it is moral. The economic future and quality of life for everyday Canadians is what is at stake, and the stakes couldn't be higher.